Hello, in this video you will learn how to use the form variables to store values inside the form itself. Spark form variables provide the ability to store data within the form, in order to use them in the other runtime rules. You can store static values in the form variables, or you can retrieve dynamic values and store them in the form variables. We can bind these variables to the form's controls directly, without the need to create SharePoint columns to store data in the list or the library. Or bind the form variables with the SharePoint list columns directly to store the values in the SharePoint list. To explain all these cases, we will take the bank commitment letter SharePoint form as an example of how to use the form variables. Previously we have created this SharePoint list. To learn how to create a list in SharePoint in detail, you can watch this tutorial video. It is listed in the description below as well. So let's start from the list at the top here. Click on Spark Forms Builder to open the canvas to design the form. As you see here, I've previously designed this form to focus on how to create and use form variables in this video. If you are interested in how to customize the design for the form in detail, you can watch this tutorial video. It is listed in the description below as well. In this video, we are going to create many variables together, and see how to use them in our form. First, we are going to create a static form variable, and store the department name in it and use it in the form. From Settings in the top ribbon, click on the Form Variables. Then, click on Add button. Type the variable name. Now we are going to select variable type. As we see here, we can create different form variables data types such as integer, boolean, string, date, people picker, etc., in order to use them in the suitable context of rules, or bind them with controls or even list or library columns. We are going with string type. As I mentioned before, the form variables can be a static value, and we can define the value of it here, then you can use it in more than one place in the form. In case you want to change the variable value, you can just edit the form variable from here, and the new value will reflect on all the places in the form. We can also map the form variable to a list column. In some cases, you want to retrieve special data and store it directly in the list column, without showing it in the form. Or in other cases, you want to bind these variables to form controls in order to store and retrieve data from, without need to create SharePoint columns to store data in the list or the library. We will discuss all the types in detail. Now let's select static type, and type the value of the form variable, HR department. Then click Save. After creating the form variable, I want to use this variable to show the department name. I will add to the header here, or any place in the form. So to display the variable value I need a label, and then set the form variable value to the label value. From the toolbox panel, drag and drop the label control. Modify the control properties. In the control ID type, label department. OK, after adding the label department control, we are going to set the form variable value for it. We are going to use the setValue function for that. To add the function we have to add a rule first. Select the label department control. Then, from the top ribbon, click on the control rules. Create a new rule. Modify the rule name. Select rule type action. And apply the rule on load. In the action text box, we are going to use the setValue function to set the form variable value to the label department. From the right panels, under Functions, Spark Forms provide 100 built-in functions. At the search box type setValue. You can have more details about the function from here. As we see here, this function needs two parameters. The control ID, which represents the selected control, label department. And the value, the form variable value. To add the parameters, there are two ways, by the wizard, or manually. I am going with the wizard. So click on the wizard icon, Case Manager wizard window will open. Select the control ID, label department, and the value. From the form variables, select variable label department. Then click OK. Then click Save. And now this label will represent the HR department, as we define the form variable value at the beginning. In some cases, we need to retrieve specific data, but we don't want to show it in the form. These data may be important for internal processes or for other departments' usage. So we need these data to be stored in the SharePoint list. We use the form variables to store these values, and map them with the list columns to store them there as well. In our case, we want to retrieve the employee's manager and store it in the SharePoint list, but we don't want to show it in the form, and the same for the employee's full name. Now we are going to create a new form variable to store the user manager in, and then store this value in the list column. Again, from Settings, in the top ribbon, click on the Form Variables. Then, click on Add button. Type the variable name, Variable Manager. Now we are going to select variable type, People Picker. Then we are going to select the mapping type, List Column. As we see here, when we select the list column, a new option has appeared, List Column. All the SharePoint columns of the current list will be listed in List Column drop-down list, in order to map the form variable to one of them. The List Column drop-down list will show only the columns types that match the variable type. As here, if the variable type is People Picker, only columns of type Person or Group will be listed in the List Column drop-down list. So we are going to select Manager SharePoint column. The operation can be read and write, or read only, depending on the purpose of the form variable, and the way you want it to interact with the form and the list as well. We are going to select Read and Write. Then click Save. OK, after creating the variable manager, we are going to store the employee's manager in it. In our case, we are going to retrieve the manager name for the selected user profile data, by the People Picker. I previously defined a function that retrieves all the user profile data, including the manager name, and applies it to the username People Picker. Let's have a quick look at it. Select the username control. From the top ribbon, click on the control rules. Select the rule Get User Profile Data, that have the function Get User Profile Data. In the action text box, as we see here, the function Get User Profile Data, that retrieves all the user profile data including the manager name into an array. If you want to learn how to retrieve the data from the user profile in detail, you can watch this tutorial video. It is listed in the description below as well. Here I have the manager value and I want to store it in the form variable that we have created. From the right panel, Form Variables, we are going to add the variable manager. Click on the plus icon. Then assign the variable's value from the array. Then click Save. Now the variable manager has the employee's manager name, and when we submit the form, the manager name will be stored in the list column dynamically. I made previously the same steps to store in the SharePoint list the employee's full name, to have it in SharePoint, but I don't need it in the form itself. The third usage for the form variables is to store values inside the form itself. We are going to bind the form variables to forms controls, in order to store and retrieve data. You will find that you don't need to create SharePoint columns to store data in the list or the library. The data will be stored only in the form. Back to our form, in the salary section, we are not interested in storing these details in the SharePoint list. So we are going to store the control values inside the form itself, by the form variables. To do that, we have to create and map a form variable for each form control here, in order to store the control value in it after submitting the form, and retrieve it any time we open the form. Let's create a form variable, and map with currency control. Type variable name, variable currency. Select variable type, lookup. Then we are going to select the mapping type, form control. As we see here, when we select the form control, a new option has appeared, list controls. The forms control to map the form variable to. Select the control currency lookup. From variable value you can add an initial value to the form variable, Here I will leave it blank. I previously had repeated these steps for all the other controls in this section. Now after mapping the form's controls with the form variables, all the controls values will be stored in the form's variables after submitting the form. Great! We have finished designing the form. Let's now publish the form, and see how it works. Let's get back to our list. Click on New. As we see here, the variable static value, HR department, in the label was retrieved. Now let's select Jim and retrieve all the profile data to the form. Let's fill up the salary section quickly. And then click on Submit. As we see here, the manager name and the full employee name have been stored in the list. And if we open the form, as we see here, all the salary controls values have been stored in the form's variables, and retrieved back to the controls when we reopen the form. At the end of this video, you saw how Spark Forms Builder provides form variables, and how we can use them in many ways, either as static values, or to store values inside the form itself, or directly in the list columns. Follow us to learn more about advances used for SharePoint and Spark Forms. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and if you have a comment, please write it down. Thank you.